Tihei Māori ora. Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua. Tuia ki te moana nui a kiwa. Tuia ki te here tangata. E rongo te pō, e rongo te ao. Tuturu whakamaua ki a tina. Homi e hui e, tai ki e. Nā mihi nui, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai rā. Nau mai ki te whare tā Paul Reeves, te wānanga aranui o Tamaki Makaurau, ko Mark Orams taku ungoa. Nau mai, haere atu rā. Welcome to all of you. If you are joining us online, we acknowledge and welcome you to this hui today as well. And especially want to acknowledge and thank you for giving up your time to come and be part of this important event as we draw this year's AUT Research Week to a close. I also want to especially acknowledge and welcome those who've joined us from outside the AUT direct community. You are also part of our whānau. And a special welcome to somebody who's joined us today who I want to acknowledge, and that's Mrs. Firkins. So lovely to see you, Mrs. Firkins. Thank you again for coming and being part of these events. Lovely to have you involved. Kia ora.
Thank you.
So today's event is very much an indication of something that we think at AUT that we do really well. And that's to form partnerships that are meaningful, that are long-standing, and that make a substantive difference. And so we're going to showcase one of those partnerships today and do so in a way that, from a research perspective, shows the benefits not just for this specific kaupapa that we're highlighting today, but the opportunity to extend that approach to other relationships and research partnerships opportunities. So I want to just move forward with that, but before I do so, and this is not to guilt you at all, but I want to just bless the food. If you've already partaken, that's absolutely fine. That's tika in this context. But it is tikanga for us to bless food, and so I'll just move through that, please. Whakapaina e nā kai, hei oranga mō te tinana, mō o mātou wairua hoki a mene. So please, as we go through the discussion today, partake in the food. You're very welcome to do that. And if you want to, you're very welcome to get up and move around. We're all physically active people and know the value of that. So there are non-alcoholic drinks that you can go and help yourself to on the right side of the room there as well. In my mihi whakatau and welcome to you, I acknowledge that this particular building is named after one of our most revered elders in Sir Paul Reeves. Sir Paul Reeves was a Chancellor of AUT and gifted us our AUT values, tika pono me te aroha. And those are things that guide us in terms of the way that we operate both internally and in terms of the partnerships that we have outside the university. So it's very appropriate that we are here today in this particular room, in the building named after Sir Paul Reeves. I want to acknowledge that Sir Paul Reeves was the predecessor of our current Chancellor, Rob Campbell, who also joins us here today. So thank you, Rob, for your continued governance, support, leadership of our university community. And in particular, it's been wonderful to see you participate in a number of the events over AUT Research Week. So thank you. I also want to acknowledge and thank those of you who've come from North Campus to join us here on City Campus today, colleagues from School of Sport and Recreation and the wider Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences. Thank you. I know that your day yesterday was very busy at Tukutuku Whare, the new building on North Campus, in the Faculty Research Showcase event that I hear went very, very well yesterday. So thank you at the end of a long week for making time and coming over here to participate in this particular event. So moving on with what we are here to really share with you and to introduce our panellists who are going to do that, is to share the story of a really important research partnership that AUT has formed with New Zealand Cricket, and more specifically with our Sport Performance Research Institute of New Zealand, which is based primarily at AUT Millennium, but also has participants in other parts of the university, particularly within the School of Sport and Recreation. This particular partnership with New Zealand Cricket has used a process of action research which has developed that partnership to be one which has become very meaningful. And as we find when partnerships work well, it goes beyond just being about the research and the outcomes of the research specifically. And we're going to tease out some of those not unexpected, perhaps extended benefits that happen when you engage in a partnership that is open, which is honest and trusting and meaningful. So I'm going to just introduce and invite our panelists who've been involved in this research to come and join me up here on my left on the stage. So firstly, let me introduce to you our colleague, Professor Leslie Firkins, who's our Professor of Sport Leadership and Governance. Leslie's a former Director of New Zealand Tennis, former Chief Executive of a number of national and regional sporting organisations. She also served for a number of years as the Director of SPRINS, our Sport Performance Research Institute, and is herself, as for many involved in our panel today, a former athlete herself as a high-performance tennis player. So, Leslie, can I please invite you to come and join us on the stage? Homewaiki paki paki. Our next panellist is Martin Snedden, who's not only the former Chief Executive of New Zealand Cricket, and many of you will remember his important leadership role as Chief Executive of the Rugby World Cup when we hosted that event in 2011. He's the outgoing chair of the New Zealand Cricket Board and the new incoming chair of Cycling New Zealand. And of course, many of you will know that Martin has a long and illustrious history as a member of the New Zealand cricket team, and Cricket Tragics will be able to quote all of his many stats of many years representing New Zealand in multiple forms of the game. Please join me in welcoming Martin Snedden. Our third panellist is somebody who's extremely important to us here at AUT because she's currently an AUT PhD candidate. Kelly McCallum is somebody who's joined us from her home country of Canada, where she at one time served as captain of the Canadian women's rugby team. She has served as coach of Japanese rugby. She also works as a lecturer in sport leadership and management in our School of Sport and Recreation, and has been integral in this particular project, which has formed the basis for her PhD. So please join me in welcoming Kelly. Now, not able to join us today, but has also been an integral part of this project, and we're going to have a video appearance from her later. And so I just want to acknowledge and mention Diana Pukitapu-Linden, who's the current chair of New Zealand Cricket. She also serves as the chair of the New Zealand Olympic Committee and has a background as a commercial director and former corporate CFO, Chief Financial Officer. So Diana is part of this team as well, and we'll hear from her later on in the presentation. So that's my introduction, and what I'm going to do now is just to hand over to Professor Firkins, who's going to outline for us action research as a particular methodology and approach to research, and the 4 stages of action research in terms of the process that are going to guide the presentation and the discussion with the panel today. So let me hand over to Leslie. Kia ora.
We're good to go. Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui, Mark. Wonderful to be here. Tēnā koutou katoa. As Mark has said, ko Leslie Firkins tōku ingoa. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, sitting in chairs next to some of my favourite people in the audience too, and talking about some of my favourite things that I love to do. And you know, this is quite a personal experience because this kind of research really comes from my heart, and it feels like it's the culmination of the things that I particularly value, but I've been able to outwork that within the context of my professional world. And by that I mean a way of doing research which is very relational, very meaningful, and has the kind of impact that you would absolutely want to hope that might come from a research endeavour. And so it really begins with the idea of, for me, placing education and sport together as a mission. So I come from a very sporting background and family. Mum got called out earlier. The reason why I speak about education and sport comes from my family influences. with my sister there too. And so I have been able to put those two things together to be able to draw benefit for sport organisations in New Zealand, and I would think beyond, in the way that we undertake our research. And so when I did come across the methodology of action research, I kind of, it absolutely resonated for me as a framework that could help embed the kind of philosophical basis that I have really thought about in terms of undertaking the research. So I'm going to start with the philosophical basis of action research. You know, we're researchers in the room, right, and we're researchers in the audience. So, you know, maybe a bit of paradigm or epistemology or ontology, let's get all those wonderful words out there. But, you know, really the philosophies of action research are deeply rooted in a relational approach. That's kind of a ubiquitous word, right? It's deeply rooted in a collaborative approach, which is another all-knowing kind of word, or a word that's everywhere. It's deeply rooted in a facilitative approach, which contrasts a telling approach, if you like. It seeks to flatten the hierarchy. So, you know, the idea that the researcher or the academic in their ivory tower, you know, like, let's play into this stereotype, knows all and is the expert, and we go to practice to take from and then use that to become more expert. You know, it kind of absolutely purposefully seeks to debunk that kind of position. So it seeks to flatten the hierarchy, whether it's perceived or real or imagined, in terms of the, you know, power balance and the way that we might work with practitioners and practice. It is embracing of all sources of knowledge. So, you know, there's expert knowledge out there in practice, isn't there? Obviously, you know, we aren't the gatekeepers of knowledge. We have a way of generating knowledge. Mātauranga is another way of generating knowledge. Practice knowledge, practical knowledge is another way of generating knowledge. So that is embracing of all sources of knowledge. It seeks to build bridges between academia and practice communities. It gets very messy in that way, and so we need a bit of a scaffold. And the thing I hold on to, and I'm going to be quiet shortly, thing I hold on to is it's got 4 phases. We just have to move through the 4 phases when we kind of get lost in all of this messiness of interaction and relationships. Phase 1 and 2, and we'll move the slide. Is it up there? Okay, great. Thank you. Phase 1 and 2, up there behind me, is all about the context and the relational approach. Go in and understand and learn and build relationships. Once you've done that, you'll learn more and know more and be able to understand more about how we can apply what it is that we want to do here with our community. Phase 3 is, what are we going to do now together? Not to you, but together with you. And phase 4 is, how did we go with that? Was there change and was there learning? Will there be impact? Will there be legacy? That's the lovely kind of phases through of when we get lost in kind of in this messy arrangement. So that's probably it from me. Your turn, Mark.
Thanks very much, Leslie. Actually, there's a slide that shows that graphically too, so we might just advance that slide if we can to slide 4. There we go. So Leslie's just outlined some of that, and as she's really shared with us the importance of building relationships, and that forms the basis of this kind of research. So I'm going to now invite Martin to really talk a little bit more about how that relationship came about and why New Zealand Cricket sought out AUT and Professor Firkins in the first instance, and what New Zealand Cricket was really hoping to gain from this, and how did the relationship building process go about, please. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Martin Snedden tōku ingoa. It really probably started before Leslie and I got to know each other, when a young woman, I think under Leslie's care here, Sophie Parker, decided that she would do a master's dissertation capturing the start of a story within New Zealand Cricket about how we were going to break through a governance barrier which had seen us at a national and a regional level and at a club level dominated by men, male governors. And in 2016, the board had engaged Sarah Beeman to do a piece of work which in lots of ways was deliberately done to enable Sarah to create a fire that cricket could not put out easily, and where it had to take action about the way in which it was connecting with and encouraging women and girls' involvement in cricket. And governance became one of the first focus areas, in fact, the very first focus area of this. So New Zealand Cricket started out off the back of Sarah's report, committing to changing the face of our governance. And Sophie Parker came along and was given access in order to start capturing the story for her dissertation. And I was extremely interested both in what we were trying to do and also how Sophie was going about capturing the story. And it just touched all the right spots for me. You know, when you're involved in sport, you know, sport is full of optimists, and they will, when you're working in the sport, you continually come up with bright ideas that you think will save the world, in cricket, for instance. And your enthusiasm results in you persuading others to embark on a course of action. But all too often, there isn't the rigour around how you embark on something like that, and how you keep track of it, and how you objectively assess your progress, and how you learn about what you're doing and then go back to adjusting and continuing forward with those learnings in mind. And so Sophie's work really grabbed me in that respect. And then I guess I was engaged in a role within cricket that meant that I was looking at various other aspects and reading literature, and I started to see Leslie's name pop up in 2 or 3 places, and I asked people, and they started to explain to me who Leslie was. And so I got in touch with her one day and I said, let's have a cup of coffee and just meet each other, and you can tell me what you do. And so we did that at AUT Millennium, and I think what we found is that we were built the same way in a lot of ways, is that we were inquisitive, we were collaborative, we were very focused on relationships being the foundation for anything that we were setting out to achieve. And I think it was then trying to work out, okay, if we've got this synergy between us, and as I was starting to further understand the value of having credible independent researchers sitting next to us, is exactly how we would focus in on this and bring it to life. And we found sort of a couple of outlets for this. One was a piece of work that isn't a New Zealand Cricket piece of work, but I'm being backed by Sport New Zealand to create a governance community of the board chairs of national sporting organisations and regional sports trusts, and off the back of that relationship platform to facilitate good governance learning for those people. And Leslie straight away put her hand up and said, I would like to help you with that. And so for the last 3.5 years, she has been a huge help to me as that project has progressed and actually got stronger and stronger and stronger. But at the same time then, I think Leslie's eyes were then open to, in the nature of her role, how could AUT connect with New Zealand Cricket to build on the work that Sophie Parker had just done. And one of the things that was happening in this phase of growing the female presence within cricket boardrooms, and there was a dramatic uplift, you know, from, I feel embarrassed to say the starting point was 11 female directors out of a total national and regional of 220 directors around New Zealand. Within a space of about 18 months, 2 years, we'd got that up to 88. And at the top level, New Zealand cricket in the 6 regions, it was over 40% and at times at 50% and occasionally more. So the representation side of it had taken off. But then we started looking really closely at how do we ensure now, having secured female presence in our boardrooms, that they themselves feel embraced by their board environments and feel empowered to use their skills and experience, not just on women's cricket, on the whole of the business and sport that was being governed by the boards. And so we started shifting our focus gradually from just about gender diversity to inclusion. And that's when Kelly popped up, and Leslie linked us up and this action research, which I'd never heard of, but when it was explained to me, it actually was very similar to what we would do. And this is one of the great things about being involved with AUT, with Leslie, with Kelly and others, is it creates a credible framework that sometimes you can put on to what it is that you actually instinctively do, but you don't know that that's the framework you're working to. So Leslie put us on to Kelly. We went through, as you have to do, the proper procedures to commit to that partnership. An important part of that was that we put skin in the game, both in terms of a little bit of financial investment, but secondly, we recognise the responsibility that we, by signing up to this, that we owed to Kelly, because we could not do this half-hearted. We couldn't do it in a flush of enthusiasm and do 4 or 5 months of work with her where her project goes for 3 or 4 years. So we had to be really, really committed to this happening. And then secondly, we couldn't expect that our partnership with Kelly was about us pushing her around and saying, we want you to look at this and this and this. It was actually about a collaboration as to what might be possible, but always respecting her independence and her right at times to say, well, actually, these are the things I need to look at. And so, Mark, it just started up, really, and it just gathered pace. And I think what Leslie has emphasised today, at all times, what was at the heart of it was the relationship strength. And from there, once you had that relationship strength, your eyes could open up and you could see opportunities that at one point in time you simply were unaware of. But through the really constant interaction that we were having, you would start to see opportunities that you hadn't thought of, but which when you looked at, thought, well, you know, they stack up. That would be so interesting for us to get into. So that's a sort of segue into the work that Kelly then started with us.
Thanks for sharing those insights, Martin. It does, I think, reflect well on you and on New Zealand cricket, the open-mindedness that you showed to reach out to seek to engage with not just Leslie but AUT and academia more generally, when many NSOs would see academia as not having relevance for the governance or the management of a national sporting organisation. So I just wanted to recognise and compliment you and the leadership of New Zealand cricket at that time for that reach out. The other reflection is how frequently do wonderful partnerships begin with a cup of coffee and a kōrero. And I'm a huge believer in making sure that we have great coffee on our campuses and great cafes. And I know that there are 2 at AUT Millennium, and they're very well utilised, and they're really important. So it's not just about the good coffee, although that is important. It's about what that actually facilitates in terms of those informal conversations that can lead to some wonderful partnerships that deliver some amazing outcomes. So we've heard from sort of Martin's recollection of the beginning of the relationship. I want to now just turn to you, Leslie, and give you the opportunity, from your perspective, when you received the reach out, you met firstly with Martin and then built that relationship from there.
Yeah, sure. And I think it was sort of the semi-lockdowny time, 21, and there was masks and limited engagement time and so on. I kind of remember that as being a bit of a part of it. We were lucky to get out today, kind of thing. I think the thing this is kind of part of my learnings at the end, but I'm going to say it now and come back to it as well. I felt an alignment, from the philosophies and the ways that Martin was talking. I kind of felt an immediate alignment with the mission I was on, to grow capability in sport across the sector, across the organised sports sector, through leadership that talks to leadership being in everyone and everywhere, and also within the context of governance, so the board grouping. And Martin was on the similar mission to grow governance capability across the sports sector with sport organisations, and himself and Bill Moran had a beer apparently and cooked up the sector governance community, which is the thing that he referred to earlier about growing governance capability, but through a leadership lens which speaks to the idea of collective leadership, facilitative leadership, not the control or command kind of style of leadership, and that is how it has played out. But my recollections were also to Leslie, just ask questions. Leslie, just ask I just wanted to tell him everything I was doing. Leslie, be quiet, ask questions. I remember deliberately trying to shut my mouth up, and it's not working so well now. And do the thing I talk about. That's the philosophy of action research. So that that's kind of one of the things that I'm conscious of always. We have a lot to say and give, right? Don't we? There's a lot of things going on in our head about the research work that we do, but we just need to be quiet sometimes and listen and ask first. I think the final reflection is I really want to call out the book. We meant to bring it today. I've given it to Mum because she wants you to sign it. A Stadium of 4 million, which Jacinda, I think, borrowed as a team of 5 million a little bit later, which is the story of the Rugby World Cup. Martin was the CEO of the Rugby World Cup in 2011 when we hosted, as Mark said. And he tells the story in that book, which is called A Stadium of 4 Million, about how he deliberately stepped into that space of the rugby world to try and crack open the hold that the traditional rugbyists had on rugby, because, let's make this a stadium of 4 million and a game for all, and create access for everyone in New Zealand and a sense of belonging to this event that we are hosting for and on behalf of New Zealand, not just for rugby. And one of his things he talks about in that book is how he wanted to do that for women, but also for many other people, migrants, immigrants, New Zealanders, anyone that had not felt connected to rugby. But he wanted to do it for women. And I had been a closet rugby fan, I think, all my life. I'd never got to play because we weren't allowed to play in high school. But, got up in the middle of the night a few times with Dad to watch the England tests and so on. And I'd kind of followed rugby and wanted to be a rugby groupie. I am a rugby groupie. But I was invited by him, by his philosophy as a stadium of 4 million to step forward, and I'm allowed to talk about rugby. I'm allowed to be a female and know something about rugby. And that's what he did in terms of his philosophical approach to that stadium of 4 million when he hosted the Rugby World Cup. And that is the philosophy that he now outworks in all that he does with New Zealand cricket, with New Zealand cycling, with the sector governance community across all of the chairs. It's the first time we've had a horizontal community of chairs, right? That's the first time we've got them all together to share and help each other. So that's probably too much. Let's give Kelly a spot.
No, not at all, Leslie. Thank you. And your enthusiasm for what you do comes through in the way that you speak about it. My reflection on what you just shared about trying to remind yourself to to be quiet or to ask questions rather than provide answers resonates. When I first got involved in coaching in the sailing game, that was a constant challenge. Even if I knew the answer to what I was seeing the athlete get wrong, I was constantly having to remind myself not to tell them the answer, but to ask them the question about why, what was going wrong, and to encourage them to actually come up with their answer to the thing that they were experiencing rather than impose my knowledge and potential answer for them. So, yeah, I resonate with what you're sharing there. Kelly, now I would like to turn to you. You've been such an important part of this journey. And of course, you're having to balance a whole range of things, the requirements and expectation of a degree that you've enrolled in and you aspire to achieve, your own personal background and experience and views about leadership in sport and governance, and also you're coming into an environment where perhaps the code itself wasn't familiar to you. So I'd just like to give you the opportunity about your journey and how it began for you, and what you saw as some of the important foundations that were built that allowed the project to proceed in a successful way.
Thanks, Mark, and kia ora, everyone. Yeah, I was thinking that as Martin and Leslie were talking and discussing right now, my very beginning starts with, I think, every researcher's beginning. Leslie said, "Have I got a great project for you?" And that was the hook to get me into curiosity into what she had to say. And I guess as you know, a rugby is my background. So when she mentioned cricket, my first reaction was, I don't know anything about cricket. And coming from Canada, cricket's not one of the major sports. But also being involved with rugby, I had been around and heard stories about how effective New Zealand cricket was in terms of leadership. And they were kind of leading, they were the bar. They were the bar in terms of leadership, where they've come, where they're going to. So I was really curious and wanting to be involved with an organization that I could learn from in terms of leadership and be involved with and take that next step. And I think one of the most guiding questions came from my PGR9. One of our colleagues, Denise, had asked the question at the end of my PGR9, why New Zealand cricket? You know, if New Zealand cricket is the bar, why wouldn't you go into a different organization where you could work with to help develop inclusive leadership practices? And it was an excellent question, and it still guides me today. It still guides me in terms of the context analysis, the first bit of where you have to do literature and find out where they've came from. But also that being a sports person, I think, you know, if you want to be excellent, then you look for excellence. And I've learned that as a sport, you know, playing for my country. In Canada, if you wanted to look for excellence, I went over to England because at that time, England would have had the best in the world competition. So very much so in terms of what's brought me to my rugby career, also brought me to being really interested in working with New Zealand cricket. And so that led me to the context of that first phase of action research, where it was kind of twofold. On one hand, I had to do all the literature as a PhD and find out the theory behind inclusion and diversity and how that's shifted into more of an inclusive focus. And I guess also being a woman in sport, we have a real, it's close to our heart, that inclusion topic. So that also drove me into here. But also, secondly, unpacking how New Zealand cricket got to where they are now. And that's been really interesting. And definitely Sophie Parker's and Tegan's and everybody's work that's been put into it. But there was also a whole decade before that really contributed, and when leadership changed. And the context that I've gone back to is really in 1995 when the Hood Report started. So that's been really fascinating seeing where they've come to now and the movements and how leadership has changed over the years. So the context analysis for me in the first phase was the twofold, the literature and the theory behind it, but also where they've come to where they've got now. So that's been really fascinating.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think that's pointed towards another important aspect with regard to the foundations that you've both outlined. So there's the foundations of the relationship that were so important in allowing this research to proceed. But what Kelly's also pointed to is that prior to the current relationships, there are people who have set the scene and laid foundation stones even before now. So there's a whakapapa that exists, and it is both appropriate and respectful to acknowledge the people who've contributed in the past, who've set the stones that allows this foundation to be the basis for this research project that's gone forward. So what I'd like to now turn your attention towards is the foundation's been set. This particular research approach is named action research. So I'm curious about the actions that you took together as part of the next phase of this research process. So Leslie, I'll turn to you first, and perhaps just you can outline the actions that you took together and why you chose those particular actions amongst other options that you might have chosen.
Thanks, Mark. Isn't it cool I'm sitting next to rugby people? It's pretty exciting. I'm apparently going to be playing for Kelly's rugby team in a few months. She's invited me in. Very cool. Well, I guess what we're doing here is exemplifying we're telling a story, we're trying to tell a story. We're up to phase 3 of the story, if you like, and we're using the phases of action research as a bit of a model or a kind of a framework to tell the story. One observation is that I guess in the work that I do, I don't always use the methodology of action research. I use the principles and the ideas and the phasing of it. So, you know, obviously as researchers, you would understand the distinction between a formalised methodology versus kind of using the principles of it. And I think that would be one of the call-outs around an encouragement. It is a full-on, challenging, messy methodology to use. And I often hear from supervisors, well, my student hasn't got time to do that, it's too hard, I'm just going to do something a bit smaller that's more realistic or whatever. I think, Gary, I don't know if you were in that position when we started your masters, maybe not, I can't remember, I think it was Scott, yeah. And so, you know, if not a full-blown action research methodology, then what about some of the principles that sit within the idea of action research? And also a guide as to, you know, the sort of the steps through. So that would be my encouragement for researchers thinking of this way of doing it. Just pick up on the things that you can do within the principles of it. And so that's what we're doing here, Mark, to answer your question. We're kind of just using the model of action research to tell the story of this relationship. And so just a couple of the other call-outs or things that we've done together really is what I will do now. You know, there was also another master's student, Tegan Bond, who undertook a master's thesis as well after Sophie, and her topic was women in sport governance, perceptions of inclusion in cricket. And Kelly has used quite a bit of her foundational research in the master's work she did for the basis of her study to help launch where Kelly needs to go next. And then there has been quite a few other kind of connect-ups between us. And I'd love to call out a chap called Andrew Tara, who's a Bachelor of Sport and Rec graduate. He did our leadership class, Gay, and he then got a job at New Zealand Cricket, working in the participation area, I think. And he tells the story of wearing a long sleeve clothes every day because he had Māori tattoos. You know, he was tattooed, and he felt it was very inappropriate to, you know, reveal that in the role he was doing at New Zealand Cricket at the time he joined. And then through the process of him just sort of doing his job as a, you know, kind of coordinator in participation, he just was who he was, which turns out he's very deeply embedded in Te Ao Māori in terms of his upbringing and what he can bring. And slowly but surely, as New Zealand Cricket was evolving itself into a more inclusive organisation, the value of Andrew increasingly revealed itself, plus he felt more comfortable to roll up his sleeves, literally, and to reveal himself and bring his culture to the table. And ultimately, through Diana and Martin, has been invited to become the leadership advisor for them, for the board and for the SLT in the Te Ao Māori and the strategy that they have built. And so if you're not aware of it, check it out. there's some fantastic resources on the New Zealand Cricket website which tells the story and the journey, the bicultural journey of New Zealand cricket, where they've come from, where they are now and where they're heading. It's an outstanding resource for all sport organisations, and massive credit to Diana and Martin for facilitating that, and the role that Andrew Tara, BSR student graduate, has played. And we've got a couple of other graduates that also have connected, Javeed Ali and a few others. So that, there's kind of been all these connects up which have all contributed, which is kind of the action stuff.
It's one of those wonderful serendipities, isn't it, where you might have some deliberate ambitions, as you seem to in the foundation of this project, and things that you wanted to achieve, but then some of the most serendipitous and wonderful outcomes are the unexpected things, like the story you've just told, that actually are some of the real gems in embarking on a journey like this. Unintended consequence, but a really wonderful outcome. Martin, I'll perhaps just turn to you, and you could share from your perspective some of the actions that were undertaken, why you chose to prioritise those, and perhaps some of the things that were unexpected that happened as an outcome of the process.
I'll just touch a little bit on that latter part first, and the story of Andrew and New Zealand cricket's bicultural journey. I'll go back again to Sarah Beeman in 2016 and her expose of us, and it revealed a lot of shortcomings, as it was intended to do, but it did. It pulled no punches. It got us on the women and girls journey quickly and in a fully committed way. One of the unexpected benefits of that, and I think it's that opening of eyes, is it then started us on a bicultural journey. Is that the opening up of our boardrooms to females meant that you had skills and experiences come into your boardroom that maybe necessarily hadn't been there before. And Diana Pukatapu-Linden's a great example of that, is that she was, unless we had gone through the journey with Sarah, Diana wouldn't have wanted a bar of being involved in cricket. But once she saw that we'd embraced what Sarah had said, she was prepared to put herself forward. But when she put herself forward, she was not confident about the environment. She didn't know cricket significantly. She'd been a fan when she was a youngster, but nothing since then. And so being in a boardroom of very experienced board members, she felt just a little bit, I don't know whether the word's intimidated, but certainly unable to necessarily lend her voice to things. And then as we started down this journey, we started to, I suppose, empower her, and for her to feel empowered to actually start to contribute. And then her leadership journey really kicked on quickly, to the point where, once my time was over as chair, she was the obvious successor, and people could really be really thrilled by her stepping into that role. But one of the first actions that Kelly, action research, I suppose, is that Kelly did with us, is she did a thing called a Q sort, which effectively she put a whole bunch of, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and the end result is is each director placing comments on a table in a way that demonstrated the character and makeup and thinking of the individual director. And so at one end of a spectrum, you'd had those that are very, very process driven, and at the far end of the spectrum, you'd have people who are incredibly creative. And each of us did this exercise, and then we spent an hour and a half, 2 hours discussing the outcomes of this. And I think it's got elements of Myers-Briggs in it, I suppose, but in essence what it did is it started to reveal to each of us how we were each built. And if you think what's behind this is about inclusion, it brought home to me as chair how important it was that I would take the time to understand the individual personalities of the people around the room, what made them tick, why it was that they would contribute in the way they contributed, and therefore start to think about how to bring the best out of them to enable them to contribute. But likewise, it did the same for each director. They could look at each other and think, oh, so that's why you are. And I think it led to a greater acceptance of how each of us was built. And that was such a lovely way to start the whole project, because it just sort of flushed to the surface straight away the not only the importance of inclusion, but how accessible it was if you took the time to actually understand each other. And so we got off to a roaring start, really, and then, you know, ideas would pop up as we went, and one of them was we had a moment in time a few months later where a long-standing chief executive resigned, and so we were on the lookout for a new chief executive, and in collaboration with Kelly, we went about ensuring that the recruitment process, if you like, was done in a highly inclusive and collaborative way. And an example of that was, and I didn't think about this, it was thought about for me, was the creation of the job description of the chief executive was not something you picked out of the employment contract of the previous chief executive. It was not something that was determined by the board of New Zealand Cricket. It actually was developed in consultation with all the staff of New Zealand Cricket, with our regions, and seeking some feedback from others. And we ended up with a job description that was spectacularly good for its inclusiveness, and people feeling really excited just about what was written on a bit of paper. And you get graphic designers involved as well, so it even resonates better. But it kicked that whole process off in a really great way. And then through Kelly's influence, we took a lot of care to keep taking people on the journey with us, because when you're recruiting someone like that, there's a whole lot of milestones along the way, and you know, it's a very process-driven journey, if you like. And for a staff member who has seen a long-standing chief executive disappear, who knows there's an interregnum period of 3 or 4 months in between us being able to recruit and bring on board the next one, by thinking about it, we were able to fill the gaps in a way that reassured the people, this is where we're up to, this is what's happening, here's the job description that we've all created together, this is the type of person that we are looking for, and you've played a part in influencing significantly what that profile is. And then so you just kept them going along that journey, and it worked. I mean, people, instead of being frightened or thrown completely by the departure of this chief executive who'd had a very successful time in his role, it actually energised people, and they were really looking forward to seeing what would emerge out of this. And then, you know, as it turned out, the chief executive that we employed was able to come on board really quickly, so the interregnum period shrunk. But people were really geared up for it. And then, you know, he was, this goes back to our bicultural journey, when he was appointed, he was formally welcomed on to New Zealand Cricket with Andrew Tara's guidance, in a really, I don't know what the description is, but it's what you'd expect if you were walking onto a marae, being welcomed on. And this happened in Auckland, and his whole family. And then it happened again in Lincoln, where we've got a whole high performance centre. So, that, I don't think any of that would have necessarily happened without the influence of Kelly and the project to get us thinking and see possibilities that otherwise we wouldn't have probably seen.
I'm just going to call out Tracy Malloy sitting in the front row, and her influence, having just finished a PhD on board nomination committees and the value that they can they have on the influence of how you recruit people, whether it's governance or CE. So Tracy was also roped in to be part of that kind of, nudging along, and let's really help get this process happening in a way that's going to work.
Nice. Thanks for those sharings. And I just want to turn to you, Kelly, because it must be enormously satisfying as a researcher to be embedded within an organisation and to see your influence result in change and to be viewed as positively as Martin's reflected on. But I'm curious about how you navigated some of the tensions of the insider-outsider role that researchers need to take, because yes, you're embedded within the organisation. In terms of action research, there is co-creation and co-delivery, but also as a researcher you need to be able to step outside of that, both to collect the data and to report on the data as expected for your PhD, and irrespective of whether it's for a PhD. As a researcher, there is that and the credibility that comes from having the ability to step back and shine some independent assessment of the involvement that you've had as an action researcher. So perhaps if you could provide some reflections on that, please.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Martin, for putting that. It's very humbling to hear from a researcher on how someone's made an impact, but always from the beginning, it's always been a team. And so as much as he said it about me, it's about him too. And Leslie and everybody's involved, so I can't take all the credit. But yeah, you're right, Mark. It's action research is with participants rather than on participants. So actually doing research with is often really challenging on stepping outside that. And probably the most important learning that I've had with this research, and probably the most fun, is the relationships that I've built. And navigating those relationships with and trying to create meaningful data and extracting that meaningful data without damaging the relationship itself, if that makes sense, is difficult. It's really difficult. And you'll see in a bit when we watch Diana's video, because we have a different way that we bring out the meaningful information that it has contributed to this project so far. And to step outside and differentiate between I'm a researcher and you're a participant, yet we're making meaningful conversation, informal conversation through dialogue, is an extreme challenge. So you'll see when we watch the video that Diana and I will have, and Martin and I've had many dialogue, informal conversations, but then I have to put my research hat on after, and that's where the reflection comes. So after every informal conversation, I put my research and I reflect and I pull out the themes, but I'm almost in a different state once I get out of that informal conversation, because I don't want to influence what comes from that conversations that I have, as you'll see on the video, where we have our conversations. So I don't know if does that help? Yeah, Mark, with the...
It does, and it's a perfect segue into sharing the video. So thank you very much, Kelly. So what we might do now is just have our team at the back queue up and play for us this video from Diana Pukitapu-Linden, just to remind you who's the current chair of not only New Zealand Cricket, but the New Zealand Olympic Committee as well.
Ko manaia te maunga, ko paranoi te Pukitapu. Ko hea mana o New Zealand Cricket, o Diana Pukitapu-Linden, taku ingoa. Manaia behind me is my mountain. I'm standing on Paranoi, which is my sacred mountain. My name is Diana Pukitapu-Linden, and I'm the chair of New Zealand Cricket. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
In terms of like the relationship between research and, I guess NZC and AUT,
How does that benefit NZC, I think, in terms of having that relationship, that partnership with AUT?
Well, I am an alumni of AUT.
You are!
So I have to get that in there.
Yeah.
Well, I know that there's been a history of people from AUT research,
Yeah.
graduates from AUT coming through NZC. And I think we've had a couple come through our system. And I guess, you know, flow on effect, here you are working with us on this project, which is beneficial. For me personally, I think I've gained from our connection and our ability to do what we do regularly, walking, hiking and just talking. And I think that from my perspective, that's added a lot of theory and context around some of the things that I have either seen or am doing or wanting to do in the future around the board table. So it enriches and it deepens my thinking around some of those things. And you know, it's interesting. I do have some of those things in my ear when I'm sitting at the table chairing a meeting, or listening intently. That's one that comes to mind. That I mean, I think we've talked about this. I'm a reasonably good listener, as are you. So that maybe that comes naturally. But I have had those words come into my head when perhaps I'd be quick to move something on. I've stopped and listened more intentionally. It's just a small example, and there are many of those. So I feel like, Kelly, that I'm personally benefiting on a daily basis as opposed to waiting till you publish your thesis. Nice. And I get to read it and then I go, okay, now I'm going to enact some of these things. I feel like I'm already doing.
That's neat, yeah, and I guess as a researcher too, like connecting the two, right, the theory that I'm reading and then connecting it to your own personal experience just strengthens what this project through my lens. So
yeah, it's both ways. So you're coming at it from a theory, research background.
Yeah.
And I'm coming at it from a practical background, and they kind of meet in the middle, and so you're gaining from a practical application of some of your theory, and I'm gaining from the deeper thinking around some of the things that I might know intuitively, but I don't have a lot of maybe academic or you know, any like that deeper context.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're both gaining, and like I say, it must be. I think it's really special that your thesis research, as you're doing it, is actually being enacted almost in real time.
Yeah, actual research.
Yeah. So it's being. We don't have to wait till you finish, and then 2 years later go, okay, so what was the impact?
Okay. Yeah.
A wonderful summary of the way that action research can roll. And I like the fact that it's encapsulated in a way that shows that the process of undertaking the research has as many benefits as the end of the project. In fact, I would expect that unlike many PhDs or research projects where there's a start and end point, this is not going to roll like that. It's going to end up being a relationship that continues on post Kelly's PhD and has the opportunity to be extended out beyond New Zealand cricket. As you know, Diana is the chair of the NZOC. That has enormous influence over sport in New Zealand, and there will be other national sporting organisations that can benefit from this kind of work as well. So I just want to perhaps now turn on some reflections on things, and this is the phase 4 of action research, just to bring us back to the 4 phases, which is about thinking about what have we learned through this process, what has been achieved, and then what are the next steps and opportunities that present themselves as an outcome. So any of the three of you grab the mic and perhaps just share some of your reflections and sort of the where to from here signposting, please.
Kelly's work, in my mind, is just a work in progress, where you start a momentum going in a certain direction, and these action research actions that you take just keep you going. One of the things that for a while I was most concerned of about stepping away from New Zealand cricket would be that that momentum would sort of slow up or fade away, but partly as a direct result of the benefits from this piece of work, and therefore Diana becoming the chair, and also other directors being exposed to the work we were doing, the thinking behind it, and embracing that, is that I now step away knowing they'll continue the momentum. They won't necessarily know exactly what the particular steps are that come next, but they don't have to. They will just have their eyes open, and they will see opportunities, and they will nail those, I think. And so the inclusiveness of our boardroom is in a really, it's in a really healthy state. Our challenge now is to somehow infuse this to the next level at the regional levels, and we have made some steps along that way during this project, but we haven't. I can't put my hand on my heart and say we've nailed this yet. Again, it sort of comes back so much to the leadership of the people at each of these levels as to whether they have their eyes open sufficiently to embrace this and recognise that there could be real value in this, and therefore be prepared to commit to it. And you know, there's just little question marks over whether or not we've got the sort of leadership. There's some, and we've seen it in some pockets, but it's not a universal one. But I think cricket would benefit enormously if we can actually keep taking it that extra step, and then if we succeed there, then keep stretching it further. So that's the challenge to us, I think, from here on.
And so, as Martin was speaking, you might have had in your head, you know, the idea of a triangle, you know, the top NSO, the NSO at the top, the regions in the middle, and the community clubs at the bottom. For those that know about sport, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those that don't, you can imagine the layers and levels, you know, national government, regional government, local government, similarly. And I think one of the things that we all have been actively trying to do is to kind of smash that triangle a wee bit and create circles instead, or flatten that hierarchy, and to create a sense of collectivism, which means that we all have a role to play in the whole. So it's a circle now, right, rather than a triangle, with those at the top telling the regions what to do, with the regions telling the clubs what to do. What's happening at the clubs is important for the regions to hear, and so on. And so I kind of speak of that to kind of highlight, I guess, the philosophical basis, I think, of what we all have been doing. And it comes from both, you know, it is a methodology, so that's the ology part of action research. You know, it's a methodology of action research. It deliberately seeks to do that, as I said earlier, to flatten the hierarchy. And it is also a deliberate philosophy of the leadership work that we do. You know, with Gay sitting here as well, Gay and I have been on this journey, Gay Bryan, been on this journey of, what do we call it, Gay? We want to reimagine, reconstruct the way that people see leadership. Because, you know, the media is real good at telling us that leadership is about, quite kind of crudely, the white man in charge, you know, like leadership is the captain, leadership is the CEO. And, you know, it hasn't been diverse. It has been that picture, and that's what leadership is. Versus, actually, we all have a part to play in this thing called leadership, and there's a difference between the leader and leadership, because leadership is a multiple thing. It doesn't belong to an individual, and we all have a part to play. Clubs do, regions do, national body does. And so I also, in that, wanted to call out the role that sport can play in New Zealand society. So the work that New Zealand Cricket has been doing in creating a more inclusive leadership across its system in a pluralistic and multiple way, and it is an example or a touchstone or somewhere for, you know, something that can help represent and understand our, you know, the New Zealand society, and similarly with the New Zealand Olympic Committee. And I speak of both because both have a very important place, a part to play on the world stage. You saw our athletes in Paris. You saw the way they behaved, the way that we have embedded tikanga into our winning and losing and the team culture. You know, it is often spoke of in terms of our winning edge on the international stage. You know how we punch well above our weight. You know, we win lots of medals for who we are and how much money we have and our population. And, you know, one of the things that we often speak about in the sports sector, our competitive advantage has been the way that we have embraced Te Ao Māori, Indigenous cultures, and have infused that into the New Zealand Olympic team. It's been a very deliberate approach for 20 years. And again, if you want to go see that, jump onto the website and have a look at the story that they have is now established and increasingly articulating, resulting in Orani Kaipara now being one of the, you know, kind of leading lights of that. New Zealand Cricket has done the same thing. But you know what? These two organisations are incredibly influential and powerful on the world stage. And, you know, New Zealand Cricket in the world context is small but huge. You know, in the Indian population, it's a great deal of influence, as so does New Zealand Cricket. And the other organisation I would quickly call out is Emirates Team New Zealand, close to that man's heart. Also been on a journey of a bicultural journey with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei for 20 years. And you're going to see some pretty cool stuff happening in the next month with some wakas and tikanga and te ao Māori with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, ratcheting up that influence and, I would say, performance. Finally, just to answer your question, I don't even know if I did. The other thing I just wanted to say was we are deliberately stepping into an inside-out process of change, and universities, one of our roles in universities is to be the critic and conscience of society. One of our roles, and I kind of want to just encourage our researchers to think of that role. And Wellbeings helps me with this, and the rhetoric he speaks about is that we can be critic and conscience of society by being on the inside as well as the outside. You know, traditionally, if we get too close, we're going to lose our objectiveness, we're going to lose our perspective, we need to stay so that we can be critic and, you know, that kind of idea. I encourage you to, as a researcher, to think about the incredibly powerful position that you can have if you sit beside and go with, but can still be the critic and conscience of society through inside-out change. And AUT, as our Vice-Chancellor often speaks about, the University of Opportunity, and the only university of technology in New Zealand, and I'm not very techie, but I translate that into AUT, the only university of practice in New Zealand. And again, I kind of evoke Wellbeings in this. He speaks of us being practice-led. We are practice-led. New Zealand's only university of technology, practice-led. I believe this is our superpower, our special position in the landscape of academia.
Thank you, Leslie. That's a great plug for our wonderful university. Well done. Kelly, you are somebody who's embedded as both a staff member and a PhD candidate, and you've come from another part of the world, and that often provides a really fascinating perspective as you've come to learn about your new home, about our Indigenous culture, about what's distinctive and different about New Zealand and New Zealand sport, and through this research project, the work that you've been able to do with one of our most well-known and loved national sports. So just some reflections from you, please, both personally in terms of your journey that you've been on and that you are still on, and the research process as well. Kia ora.
Yeah, and when I reflect on where I've come to, where I'm at now, and where it's going, two things come to mind, and that's number one is leadership. I wouldn't be here with the person next to me that's sitting here. We talk about leadership, but Martin's been a guiding light in this whole project and the projects and for New Zealand cricket. And when I finally submit my thesis, you'll read back and there'll be a common theme that is throughout that thesis on why we're here today and why New Zealand cricket is here where it is today. So I just want to thank you personally, Martin, for the journey so far, and also my supervisors, Leslie Firkins and Charlotte. You two are guiding lights throughout this project, and it is a team effort. So I thank you too, Leslie. Yeah, personally, it's interesting, and it's probably come into this research, and I guess from a research perspective, the importance of relationships and how to do those relationships in research. Action research is with. But building relationships, there's no cookie cutter way to do it. You saw Diana and I, so that's actually how we do our research, is we catch up once or twice a week and we walk the mountains, and that's our catch up. That's our coffee catch up, is we actually walk, and that's how I get my data from the project. Martin and I, we would catch up over Zoom or face to face, and that's how we caught up, and we got that meaningful data and insights for this project. Every building relationships is all different, and it's just about finding that way where you can share that informal space and kind of get that really deep, meaningful data or conversations that's going to contribute. So I guess that's just for the researchers that are listening out there. It's find that space, find that context and an environment that works for you and the person that you're involved with, because that's where you're going to get the real meaningful words and data and everything else that comes with the project.
Kia ora, thank you, Kelly. It now falls to me to just wrap up before we open the floor for questions for our panel. And a number of reflections, but I'll keep it relatively short. The first is that you referred to something that there's a whakatauki in Te Ao Māori which expresses what you've shared, Kelly, and that is that kōrero me te kai ngā rangatira. That is, the food of leaders is conversation. And so the sharings through those conversations have been enormously powerful for you. We heard also from Diana how powerful and important it was for her. Whether that happens through a walk, whether it happens through a coffee or over a beer or a wine, or via Zoom, that's really the basis of the building of the relationships and the maximising of the opportunity. So I just really want to acknowledge you drawing that out. Another reflection is that when I listened to you speak, Martin, about the work that's still to be done, the challenges that are ahead, and the opportunities that this research provides, I thought there is a sports person speaking. Because when you are a sports person, you recognise that the quest for continuous improvement never stops. You're never somebody who can just say, right, I've nailed this, and now it's time to sit back. And so what you've done is provided, I think, a signpost to the future about the opportunity that this research with New Zealand cricket has provided. And it's not just for other sporting codes. There are lessons here for other things for our nation that we take on that are challenging, to ensure that we are inclusive and that we take advantage of the opportunities that diverse peoples bring. We are an extremely diverse society in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We have an Indigenous culture that belongs to here and belongs to all of us. And Te Tiritio Waitangi gives us this wonderful opportunity of partnership that allows all of us to honour and participate in this wonderful Indigenous culture. And so that is something that has been drawn out, and Leslie pointed us towards that as well. And we should see that as something that is an enormous privilege and an advantage and a blessing of living in these islands. Another thing that I got out of this too, and Leslie pointed to this as well, and talking about the distinctive nature and characteristics of our university, the Auckland University of Technology. Firstly, Leslie called out a number of graduates, a number of students who've been through our university. One of the greatest influences we have is through the ability to shape people who we have the privilege of being involved in their journey, in their education, and what their aspirations are in life. And when they go on from our university, they go on to influential positions, they go on to leadership roles that make a difference across communities, across different disciplines, across different careers. And that's something that we can all be extremely proud of. Every single graduation ceremony, I think about that and think about the wonderful opportunity we have as a university. And as New Zealand's only university of technology, and I like Professor Welby-Ing's call for us to be practice-led, it appears to me that this action research kaupapa fits us so well, because what it does is it embeds us within our communities of practice. It embeds us within iwi, within government agencies, not-for-profit, national sporting organisations, within businesses. And what it says is that we're not a university that is removed, that do things on our own and then hand them over or laud from on high. We're a university that actually does things in a way that walks alongside and in direct partnership with these communities that we're a part of. And that's something that is enormously in the kaupapa of AUT. We come from a background as a polytech. That is not something that we should ever be ashamed of. It is something we should be deeply proud of, because what that says is that we have people who chose to both work here and also to come and study here, who value practice, who value life experience, and whether you're a chef, whether you're a sporting athlete, whether you're a chemist or an engineer or a lawyer, that you have value that you can bring to this place as a researcher and as an educator. And that is something that I think we can all be hugely proud of. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of those reflections on the wonderful sharings that you have blessed us with over the last hour. Thank you. You'll see there's a prompt question. As educators, we're all trying to make sure that we stimulate your thinking, not looking for a definitive answer to that, but just to think about what are the key learnings or takeaways from this session that you might reflect on later and perhaps look at evolving or incorporating into how you go about doing things, whether that's as a researcher, whether that's as a professional staff member, or whatever part you play with regard to our university community. So let me now stop speaking and give you the opportunity. If you've got a burning question or something you're curious about, please feel free. We have a roaming microphone, so Nays is going to bring that to you. So I'm sorry to be a little bit school teachery here, but just so that we can identify, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and then Nays will bring the microphone to you. That's important just to remind you, for those of you, hello, who are still with us online, so that they can hear the question and the answer. Kia ora. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed that. And it did remind me, Leslie, that I wanted to do my masters on cricket, not rugby, but, you know, because that cricket was my passion, and coaching. But anyway, it was fun doing it. I guess one of the things that really came through to me, Remy and I work on, particularly on MB bids, and it's just, that's the Endeavour Fund, so for those that don't know. And one of the principles of action research really came across to me, maybe only in some cases it's with the participants in terms of doing the actual research, but the importance of context, of relationship with stakeholders and end users, of involving them in the research all the way along, and supporting them to implement the research results is just critical. And we don't always see that, and some researchers really struggle with quite a bit of aspects of that. So I'm really interested. I mean, you seem to have had it really fortunate because you're passionate about the sports and you've been involved. Martin from New Zealand Cricket, we're seeing the need and we're actively trying to engage, but we don't often or frequently get that situation. So I'm really interested in your insights for researchers and for the rest of us on what are the sorts of things that perhaps as researchers we ought to proactively do to engage early and to build relationships. You talked about asking questions and not just going in and promoting your research, but I'm interested in what other insights you have.
Well, that's kind of it, really. um, and I suppose, you know, it's hard when you are doing research and you're studying. You've got a head full of theory and ideas and knowledge, and you're excited about it. You absolutely want to share that, and so it's really hard to suspend that, to go in and ask and listen first. And I mean, quite simply, I'm not sure I've got many other ideas to answer your question, but that's harder than it sounds. You good.
Just helping you out. On the other side of it, neither would I or perhaps others in my position want to connect with researchers unless we could feel a synergy with them, and we did not want to be in a position of having theory thrown at us the whole time, which was of limited interest or applicability for us. So just having that relationship base that could almost enable you to negotiate how the best way forward was going to be important, and we've been extremely lucky with both Leslie and Kelly to have people with that sort of natural willingness to engage in that sort of partnership.
I guess from just really quickly, like from a researcher perspective, and really starting to build those relationships, the very start of it, for me, it was really daunting. I mean, one of the first emails is I had to email Martin Snedden for his email. So I think the first email, it was 5 times. I reread it, and finally sent it. But it changes. The relationships change, and they get stronger and stronger. So the more emails, the more talking, the more dialogue, the conversations that you have with people, those relationships get stronger and stronger. And I guess that's just a good reminder that it does start hard, and it will be challenging, but keep with it, because now our relationship's very different, and I only look at it a couple times before I send you. Don't even say "Dear Martin" anymore.
Thank you all. Thank you for the question, Gary. I haven't been particularly diligent in my timekeeping, but I'm not going to apologise for that, because I think the kōrero was so valuable I didn't want to curtail it. But one more question, if anybody has a pressing question. Nick, please go ahead.
I thought you were just shutting down my opportunity. Thank you all very much for the storytelling today, and the sharing resonates deeply with me, and I've really enjoyed the session. Thank you. Leslie, we had the pleasure of Leslie speaking briefly at our roadshow yesterday, and touched on a little bit of this. And in the title of your session, you said, "But is it real research?" And I think there was a provocation, right, I guess, to recognise the context in which you are often undertaking this kind of research. And I wondered if you could share any reflections on that, and how we grow, make visible, legitimise this research, because I agree, it totally resonates with our aspirations as a university, but we are often still embedded in a context that finds this type of research quite challenging, within this hierarchy of evidence that we often are stood up against, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And so I think over the course of the last couple of days in preparing for this, that has really helped me understand what it is that I do and why, what it is that we do and why. And I think to answer your question about is it real research, the sorts of things that I hear are concerns or hesitations about the positioning and being so close to the action. And in our case in sport, you might call that sport washing, which is the cousin of greenwashing. So going in and helping organisations do something that they want done, and using you to do that, and you finding the evidence to help them do what they want to do. And I think that's a legitimate hesitation and concern. You know, we as researchers need to be independent sometimes, and we need to have our own critic and conscience about what it is that we're doing and who we're doing it with. And so that would be the first thing I would say about, I guess, the journey I've taken, is coming to understand the position I am in other words, trying to be on the inside or as close to the action as I can be. I'm not actually work for New Zealand Cricket, do I know? I don't. I don't. So really being deliberate, I'm here. I have this position now. Gosh, what does that mean? Well, it means why am I there? What am I trying to achieve? Like being really transparent and conscious about my position and my purpose. And similarly to understand self, similarly to understand the other and ask the other to understand and explain. Why do you want me here? What are you trying to achieve with me? And, if you start to hear the greenwashing or the sport washing thing, then it's not the place for me. But if it is a genuine curiosity to get better and to learn and grow, and when you know better, you can do better kind of idea, then we've got a thing going. So not just myself challenging my own kind of position and thoughts, but getting the partner to do the same. And so it is about being transparent about your position, recognising the proximity is close, and then challenging the purpose and making sure that's what we're actually wanting here.
Thank you, Nicola. Professor Nicola Kays from Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences, Associate Dean Research there, and Leslie's response is an apt one. I just also reflected in that question and response a conversation that we had last week in preparing for today's session, where we traversed this challenge of the independence and credibility and rigour that's needed as a researcher with being the insider, the co-designer in an action research context. And I'll perhaps hand it to Martin, because it was his response that was most powerful with regard to the importance of the credibility of that independence from the NSO's perspective. And so for us as researchers, it is important not only that we retain our credibility and let the evidence speak, and even if the evidence, or perhaps especially if the evidence, provides conclusions that are counter to the wishes of the people we're working with, we have an obligation to respectfully but truthfully deliver the outcomes of that research because of what the evidence tells us. And so that is an obligation we have as researchers and we have as an academic community. And that's extremely important that we don't forget that. We are not simply consultants for hire that are going to go and tell a client what they want to hear and then charge them money for it. We have a higher calling and a higher standard of expectation of our research than that. And so perhaps I'd just offer for Martin to share, when we discussed this last week, your perspective on the other side from the importance of researchers retaining their independence and credibility.
Mark, I'm just scratching my head trying to remember what I told you the other day, but you've hit it on the nail on the head. Is if you have a genuine desire to learn, then you need to know the truth. And if you want to sell a story that makes you look good, then all right, there's some things you want. But if you're actually trying to work out what the right answer is, then you need the truth. And when you're working within an organisation, you're not entirely built to reveal the truth. That's the reality, is that if you've got built-in biases, built-in pressures that all too frequently get in the way of the absolute truth emerging, and not only emerging, but actually being fully visible to the key decision makers. And so it's really helpful to have someone who's independent, who actually is able to put that stuff on the table, and then you've got to make a choice. do you do something about it or don't you? But that's your choice once you receive it. But the risk is that unless you have that, key decision makers might never see the full truth, and therefore they're going to make decisions that aren't based on the full reality. They'll always see a lot of the truth, but not all of it. So I think, that's what I've loved about the relationship with Leslie, with Kelly, with AUT is, and it is the practice that I love so much. It's the fact you are dealing with people who are intelligent and well trained, but you are dealing with practice, not theory, and that's a great thing to be involved in. And I can sit here and I can think of stuff we can do with each other going forward that won't be anything to do with cricket, or perhaps be to do with the other project we're doing, working on together. But there's endless possibilities, so it's great to have a partner who is prepared to consider at least whether there's value in them being involved in that, and where there is, get stuck into it and do it.
Kia ora, that's a wonderful sharing to finish this particular session on. Before we disappear, I'm going to invite you in just a second to acknowledge our panellists and especially the work that they've been doing, and acknowledging that there are others in the room and elsewhere too who are contributors to this. I would invite you to just stay for a few minutes. We've got a couple of small awards to make of a research translation competition that we've been running as part of AUT Research Week. Research for Impact is our theme this year, and so we're going to recognise that in a few minutes' time. But before then, can I just please invite you to acknowledge and thank our panellists for their sharings today. Kia ora, haumaki Pākehā. Thank you. So just a couple of quick things to move through this AUT Research Translation Competition. So thank you, team. What we decided to do is to challenge our researchers across the university to take one of their scholarly research outputs that they have produced in the last 3 years and to translate it into a general audience without sacrificing the credibility and accuracy. What you'll recognise is that most of the dissemination of our research comes through peer-reviewed journal publications, sometimes through book chapters and other publication outputs. But they are couched in a kaupapa that is not particularly accessible to non-academic readers. So for non-academics, what we do is not only a different language, it's in many cases something that they're not even aware of. For our research to be impactful, we need to be able to translate that complexity of the research that we do so that it is not only palatable, but it is actually attractive and makes sense to a non-academic audience. And that's not an easy thing to do. As academics, we have a habit of taking things that might be relatively simple and turning them into something incredibly complicated. There's real wisdom in doing the reverse, taking the complexity of our research and pulling out the essence and delivering a simple message that can be powerful and impactful. And so that's what this competition was designed to incentivize people to take on as a challenge. I also want to shout out that later on this afternoon we have our 3-minute thesis competition finalists and winner announcements. This is for our postgraduate research students, particularly at doctoral level, who are producing a thesis somewhere in the vicinity of 100,000 words that, and Kelly, yes, I know you're on this process at the moment, and that has taken them 3 or 4 years to produce, and they are challenged to distill that down into 3 minutes of presentation that gets the essence of what their thesis is all about and what it has found out. So this particular competition we divided into 2 categories, one for our early career researchers and then one for the mid to senior career category. We brought in judges from outside the university and outside academic training, and I want to acknowledge our 2 judges, Finlay McDonald, who's the senior editor of The Conversation New Zealand. Most of you will be familiar with The Conversation as an attempt to do just what I've described, to distill down important scientific information and make it understandable and attractive to a wider audience. And the second judge was Desha Herbolik, who's the director of the Science Media Centre. So both of these judges are expert in this particular area of translation. So we had them look at a number of entries, and they picked our two winners and then somebody who got an honourable mention. So I'm going to announce the winner or winners, because they are co-authors of our early career research translation competition. Those winners are Kabir Deshgupta and Alexander Plum for their article entitled Sexual Orientation Earnings in New Zealand, which is based on their article by the same name with another co-author, Carpenter. So I understand that Alexander is here, and I have a certificate to award on behalf of you and your co-author. Please join me in congratulating Alexander and his co-author on this award. Cool. Our second category is somebody who's actually involved in another commitment this afternoon, so unable to join us in person. But I do want to acknowledge her work and the judges in particular, some of the things that they drew out from it. The winner of our mid-senior career category for the research translation competition this year is Associate Professor Gwyn Lewis from the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences for her article, A Meaningful Assessment of Chronic Pain for Māori. It's based on, and this is, I guess, one of the differences between an article translated for more palatable digestion than an academic article. So the translation piece, A Meaningful Assessment of Chronic Pain for Māori, makes a lot of sense, easy to understand. The article itself, Development of a Culturally Informed Tool to Assess Chronic Pain for Māori, the Pictorial Representation of Illness and Self-Measure, Aotearoa Prism A. So not too actually convoluted from an academic article title, but nevertheless quite long. But I want to acknowledge that Gwyn, as the primary author, had co-authors and collaborators on this project, Stevens, Tuck, Moranga, Terry, Ha, Shay, Hodge, and Ben. And that's currently in press in alternative. So in her absence, but please join me in congratulating Associate Professor Gwyn Lewis and her co-authors for this work. And finally, the judges also gave an honourable mention, and I'm going to read out a little bit about why for this particular category. And it goes to Paul Woodfield's article entitled Preparing Early Career Researchers for Success, something that's tremendously important as a priority for us here at AUT. In fact, I've just come from our Early Career Researchers Symposium immediately prior to this. And so supporting our early career researchers in their aspirations and navigating the complexity of an academic career is an important investment for us to make. And here's why the judges pulled this out, is because the article used a quote from an anonymous senior researcher. And this quote was the immediately the attention grabber that drew people in from outside of a normal academic audience to read the remainder of the piece. And here is the quote that Paul Woodfield started with, not his quote, from an anonymous, not honourable actually, anonymous senior researcher. And the quote says this: "Look, at the end of the day, researchers are farmers and PhDs are cows. And you milk them. If you can't milk your cow, the town dies because nobody can drink milk. You've got to have your cows to milk." So that expresses a really exploitive approach from senior researchers to their PhD students, which is something which is not only immoral, it is something that I know that at AUT here we find or view with some disgust. But it was used because, unfortunately, there is this attitude still out there in the academy that PhD students are somehow your glorified research assistant that you can exploit to advance your own career ambitions. And so this is why it captured attention because it immediately invoked some outrage in response to that. And so Paul then went on in that article to talk about, actually, here's what we should be doing to mentor, to encourage, and to develop researchers who are early in their career. So thank you to the judges. Congratulations to the award recipients. The winners in each category are receiving $750 credited to their research account. So many congratulations. And I want to thank and acknowledge from our Te Kahui Poipoi Rangaho, our University Research Office team, Usha Bhatia, for their work in organising this competition. So kia ora, thank you Usha, I see you here next to the Chancellor for that work and leading that. Kia ora. So that brings us to the end of the formalities and actually the end of AUT Research Week for 2024. We do have, as I referred to before, our 3-minute thesis competition finals later on this afternoon, but this is the largest final event that we have. So it's been a real privilege and a pleasure to not only have this session, but also to have the entire week of focusing on research and researchers. We are New Zealand's youngest university, New Zealand's only university of technology, and as a result, we are still working to build our research culture, our research capability, and our pride and enthusiasm for research. What this week has shown is that that is in good shape. We are on an upward trajectory. We have a lot of involvement across the university in a wide range of disciplines. We also deliberately and proudly involve our postgraduate research students as an essential part of our research community. We involve and we celebrate and are grateful for our partners from outside the university in our research endeavour. And so I just want to close by acknowledging all of our whānau AUT research community. It is an absolute privilege and a pleasure to be involved with it. So I'll finish with karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatā. Koia rā I rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, kia tina. Omie huie, ai ki e. Kia ora everybody, thank you for giving up your time and your patience with me in what's been, I think, a wonderful session. Kia ora. Tihei Māori ora. Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua. Tuia ki te moana nui a kiwa. Tuia ki te here tangata. E rongo te pō, e rongo te ao. Tūturu whakamaoa ki a tina. Omi e hui e, ai ki e. Kia ora koutou, nau mai haere mai ki te hui. Ko Mark Orams taku ingoa. My name's Mark Orams. My pleasure to welcome you to this final event of the 2024 AUT Research Week, Te Wiki Rangaho. It's a pleasure to have you here and thank you so much for giving up your time on a Friday afternoon when many people in the university community consider the university to be well closed and everybody should be home or heading for home. So thank you so much for giving up your time to be here for the 3-minute thesis competition prize giving and announcements. Much appreciated. I want to acknowledge not only our postgraduate students who are here and our entrants, but also I see some of their supervisors who are here as well. Whānau, family members, friends, you are all very welcome at this event. It's my pleasure now to introduce our Master of Ceremonies for this particular event, Professor Nigel Harris, the Dean of the Graduate Research School. O mai ki paki paki.
Mark, my good colleague, Ngā mihi nui kia koe, for the mihi and words of welcome. Thank you. So, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Nigel Harris. I'm the Dean of the Graduate Research School, as Mark said, and it's a pleasure to be MC this afternoon on the 2024 AUT 3MT competition. And I'd also like to welcome those who are with us in the live stream, the live audience, through the camera. Welcome. It's good to have you all on board as well. Now, this year's competition is for doctoral students only, so that's a slight departure from previous events, and it is in a video-only format. So, of course, that's a very contemporary format that has been sprung upon us over the last few years of the little bug that's been circulating, and it has kind of stayed with us, and that's the format that we've chosen to use for the 3MT, or has become the 3MT. So I'd like to give you an overview of the competition before we dive into it. The 3MT competition was developed at the University of Queensland in 2008, and it's been running ever since then. The concept was simple, and doctoral students explain their complex research in 3 minutes, believe it or not, with only one slide. So that's a challenge in and of itself. And their challenge is to make their advanced research accessible so they can communicate it and boil it down or distill it for non-specialists. So that is an entire set of skills right there. 3MT competition is held in over 900 universities in more than 85 countries internationally. So it is not just New Zealand, Aotearoa and Australia, it's around the world. The winner tonight, who you will find out shortly in due course, will represent AUT at the international level, competing at the Asia Pacific Finals in October, coming up very soon. Now, it is a prestigious competition, so our finalists, you can be proud of the fact that just by getting this far, you've already succeeded in one of the world's tough competitions in terms of presentation of research. You've risen to the challenge. You had to distill, but you had to capture in one slide, and then you have to time it in 3 minutes. And the thing is, if you don't, you're disqualified. So you can't go any longer than 3 minutes and 1 second. Now, you ask any academic that's had to present, that's a bit of a challenge in and of itself. So congratulations just for achieving that. It's no mean feat. So over the past few weeks, our judges have narrowed down a talented field of entrants, and there's just 3 finalists, and you'll see their videos very shortly. For their efforts, there's some great prizes on offer, and I'd like to acknowledge our 2 sponsors, AUT's Graduate Research School, that most of us would know as the GRS, and also AUT's ICT Services and their supplier partner Cyclone. Thank you very much to the 2 sponsors for providing the prizes for these 2 awards. Now, you have a say in this tonight, so fairly soon you are going to see a QR code pop up on the screen, and I'm guessing also at home for the online viewers. So get your mobiles ready. You don't need to film anything because they'll be available later, but you can scan that QR code and you will have a say in choosing one of the awards tonight, the audience favourite presenter, and they will win a $500 research award from the Graduate Research School. Now, the winner of the overall competition, so that's the winner of the AUT 3MT competition, will receive from our supplier, our sponsor, AUT ICT Services, and their supplier partner Cyclone, a HP Pro Book X360 435 G9 with a pen from ICT Services and supplier partner Cyclone, and the $500 research award from the Graduate Research School. So some pretty fantastic prizes there. Thank you to both of our sponsors. Now, the judging panel. There are 4 judges, and I'd like to introduce all 4 to you, and you'll see them on the screen. One of them you have met already, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, Professor Mark Orams. Lookman Hayes is our Research Services Senior Manager at Te Mata Puna. Dr. Michelle Ladwig-Williams is a Researcher Education and Development Specialist at the Graduate Research School. Michelle's over there. Thank you, Michelle. And competitors who has very much been in your shoes, but not just in your shoes, who was a prior winner of the competition last year, in fact, 2023, and that is Madeline Hayward, winner of the 2023 AUT 3MT competition. So thank you to our 4 judges. The rules. As the MC, I have the honour of relaying to you the set of rules. Now, the first one you'll never guess, and that's they get 3 minutes to present. And as I said, that is very strict. They're disqualified if it goes anywhere over time, so that in itself is something. The video entries, there's strict rules about how videos are filmed, and the audio must be continuous, so that's 1 take only. So the competitors were not able to film and edit and take and retake and patch that together. It's a 1 take only situation. So you can imagine how much work goes into preparing that. One slide, as I said, and it has to be static, so you don't get the good old PowerPoint animations. There are no other visual aids other than just the one slide allowed. There's no sound effects, no animations, and our contestants are barred from using any props, costumes, performative elements, no poems, raps, or singing. Those are the rules. So, it is important to note though that while the entries had to be filmed, entrants aren't judged on their filming or editing skills. It's not about that. It's about their ability to present their research, not their technical skill with the filming. So there are two key criteria, and I'll read those out to you so you know how our competitors have been judged. The first one's around information. The judges would call that comprehension and content. So in this category, judges are looking for presentations to meet three things. The presentations needed to provide clear motivation, background, and significance to the research question, was number one. Number two, clearly describe the research strategy, design, and the results and findings of the research, so that research process distilled down. And number three, clearly describes the conclusions, outcomes, and impact of the research. So that's really the technical bit, the information, which in itself is a skill to distill to a lay audience. And then we come to the presentation criteria. So that is engagement and communication. So what were the judges looking for there? Well, language appropriate for non-specialist audience. It's not a conference of like-minded individuals in your own discipline, and that makes it more challenging. Slide well-defined and enhance the presentation. And of course, the presenter conveying some enthusiasm for their research and capturing and maintaining your attention as the audience. Equally weighted, those two categories. So those who succeed in the 3MT competition, they needed to balance that technical skill of presenting the research with their presentation style and the slide to go with it. So we're about to watch these slides, and that's these finalists' presentations on video, and that's what you're here for. They've been randomly selected in terms of the order, and I would like to introduce to you now the first presenter, or the first video of the presenter, and that is from Linda Kirkpatrick, who's doing her PhD with the Department of Economics and Finance in the Faculty of Business, Economics and Law, and also in the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences. And her presentation is titled MIMBY, Maybe in My Backyard. Are residents worse off when there is social housing development in their neighbourhood?
Residents fear antisocial outcomes from social housing in Millwater. We often see headlines like this crop up in the news, and we know this term as NIMBYism, or not my backyard, where residents are opposed to urban development, particularly social housing development, in their neighbourhood. Drivers for this sentiment include fear of antisocial behaviours from social housing tenants, and neighbourhoods with social housing appearing less desirable and attractive. Kaingaora is the government agency responsible for the provision of social housing and urban development in New Zealand. These developments have the potential to deliver better outcomes, not just for social housing tenants, but for all residents, by providing better housing and neighbourhood amenities. Since 2018, they have built 10,000 new homes, and there are another 30,000 on the way in the next 10 to 15 years. However, even with ongoing development, the demand for social housing outstrips the supply. As of March 2024, there were 26,000 people on the social housing waitlist. So I wanted to see, are residents really worse off where there is social housing in the neighbourhood? I have housing intensification data from Kaingaora, which allows me to identify which Auckland neighbourhoods are being developed, and I have population-wide administrative data, which allows me to identify everyone in Auckland who lived in social housing and who didn't between 2015 to 2021. So if more social housing development is better for the neighbourhood, then we should see worse outcomes for residents in areas with social housing development, I call this treated population, compared to areas without social housing development, I call this the control population. I use a modelling method called difference in differences that allows me to treat housing intensification experiment which allows me to test the differences between the treated and control populations. And what I find is, for non-social housing residents living in treated areas, they are no more likely to be victims of assaults, thefts, or robberies, nor do they have higher mental health utilization compared to control residents. When looking at population composition, treated residents have the same earnings, the same level of people receiving benefits, and there's only a small difference in those with a bachelor's degree compared to the control population. So social housing tenants aren't the antisocial neighbours they've painted out to be. The mental health of treated residents isn't any different to the control residents, and the treated neighbourhoods look like the control neighbourhoods. They have not descended into a dystopia. So to summarise, we know that New Zealand faces substantial housing challenges, and social housing is one means to provide accommodation for those who really need it. The evidence shows there are no negative impacts on non-social housing residents living in these areas, and so if we can provide accommodation for those who really need it, no one is worse off, then maybe, yeah, maybe in my backyard.
Well, Linda, thank you for that presentation. It's certainly a contemporarily relevant topic internationally, nationally, and most certainly in this conurbation that we call Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Thank you, Linda. So our next presentation is from Ryan Howard. The title of Ryan's presentation is A Flash of Ingenuity. Deep sea squid eyes are optimized for bioluminescent communication. Now, Ryan is undertaking his PhD in the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences within the School of Science.
Imagine living in a world with crushing pressure, near freezing temperatures, and eternal darkness, but still relying on your eyes to find food and avoid being eaten. It's fascinating to think any animal could see in those conditions, yet every day billions of squids use vision to survive in the deep sea. My research is aimed at understanding the adaptation squids have evolved to be visually successful in the dark. The first clue to understanding why squids have excellent vision can be found in their similarity to us, humans. The closest common ancestor between humans and squids resembled an eyeless worm that lived nearly 600 million years ago, and yet we have both independently evolved the same camera-like eye design. Let me explain that. Inside traditional cameras, light imprints an image of your subject onto film. Similarly, inside camera-type eyes, light imprints an image of the environment onto a retina. However, the retina works a bit differently than film. In the retina, microscopic photoreceptor cells use a protein to convert light into images you or a squid might see. Except squids are colorblind. They have a single visual protein that is tuned to optimally absorb a specific wavelength of light based on the needs of the species. That absorbance can be measured and tells us which color of light the squid is most sensitive to. Now you might be wondering, how can squids see in the deep when there's no sunlight? Well, light in the deep sea can be created by bioluminescent organisms. In fact, the deep sea is so large that bioluminescence may be the single most used form of communication on Earth. Many species of squids also use bioluminescence, including a genus of large squids found in New Zealand known as Teningia, which have the largest bioluminescent organs in the animal kingdom, about the size of a lemon. However, while bioluminescence in the ocean is blue, surprisingly, the bioluminescence from Teningia is a yellowish-green color, seen here on the left. Occasionally, specimens are collected from fishing bycatch and brought to the lab where I can extract the visual protein from the retinas and measure its absorbance. And what I found is fascinating. It seems Teningia have tuned their vision to better see the same yellowish-green light their bioluminescence emits. Since squids are colorblind, Teningia would perceive their bioluminescence as light brighter than what other squids would see, like the figure shown here on the right. This suggests that Teningia use their unique combination of vision and bioluminescence to communicate over vast distances underwater, while allowing their light to remain relatively imperceivable to predators that are not well attuned to see light from the green to yellow spectrum. These findings are significant because the 2020s have been declared the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development by the United Nations. Never has humanity explored the deep sea as vigorously as we are right now, which requires equipment outfitted with bright white lights that can damage the eyesight of nearby animals, including squids. Reconfiguring our deep sea lighting systems to emit wavelengths of light that squids are most sensitive to, such as light from the green to yellow spectrum in the case of Teningia, could prevent us from injuring passing individuals. It's a sentiment I'm sure that Taninja will appreciate. After all, it's already hard enough to see in the world as dark as the deep sea.
Ryan, thank you for that fascinating insight into the dark, or maybe not so dark, world of the deep depths of Taninja. Our final video this afternoon is from Varuna Virasikara from the School of Sport and Recreation within the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences. And his presentation is titled Defensive CGMs, a Behavioural Approach in Diabetes Care.
I'd like to invite you to visualize yourself living inside a modern room with no windows and no access to your weather reports. If you were to leave the room and go outside the building for a walk, would you carry an umbrella or raincoat with you? Because there's that possibility it could rain any time. Now compare that to a situation where you can see it raining outside the window. And now if you had to go outside the room for a walk, would you carry an umbrella or raincoat with you? Most of us would, isn't it? I can see you nodding. Most of us are likely to show improved response or the most appropriate behavior if we can see what's happening in real time. And that is exactly the concept I shall explore in my diabetic research. And for this, I'll be using continuous glucose monitors or CGM devices. Now these CGM devices are very cool devices. They're normally worn at the back of your arm and they provide me with my blood glucose information in real time directly to my phone app. So effectively, CGM devices are giving me a window into my own body. And so my primary question is to see how effective CGM devices are at eliciting the all-important behavioral responses, changes to dietary patterns and or physical activity levels in diabetic patients. My research is spread across 3 different studies, with the first one being a scoping review. A scoping review is like a reconnaissance mission, where I identify what the gaps are, what methodologies have been deployed already in CGM studies done around the world, and what CGM-related goals are worth pursuing. My second study is where I qualitatively and quantitatively analyze an existing data set of blood glucose and behavioral information obtained from a small sample of diabetic patients. Now these 2 studies will inform the design and execution of my third and largest study, which is a clinical trial. It is also a randomized controlled trial. In this trial, I shall qualitatively and quantitatively assess the behavioral, clinical, and psychosocial changes you would see in pre-diabetic and diabetic patients who have access to their own CGM data, as opposed to pre-diabetic and diabetic patients who only rely on diabetic education as guidance without any of their own CGM data. For this trial, the primary group of patients I shall recruit as subjects are Mara Pacifica patients, because we know our Mara Pacifica communities are predisposed to type 2 diabetes, and we want to see if we can make an impact there. Type 2 diabetes is a killer disease. It kills 1 every 5 seconds somewhere on Earth. So it is our hope that CGM devices would act as an intervention tool and would be the fence at the top of the diabetic mountain, arresting progression of this condition at the pre-diabetic and diabetic stages, so that we don't have to put up with so many diabetic ambulances at the bottom of this mountain. Thank you for your attention.
Varuna, 1 death every 5 seconds. That is quite the scourge. And so congratulations for tackling that and doing that with a clinical trial. You are a brave man. Well done. So that concludes the 3 presentations. And now grab your devices out. You'll see the QR code pop up in just a second on the screen. Now, in a nice little symmetry, you're going to guess how long you get to cast this vote. 3 minutes. So it's your 3-minute competition. Now, while you are doing that, I'd very much like to invite Professor Mark Orams, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, and of course one of our 4 judges, back up to the podium to say some words on behalf of all 4 judges. Mark.
Kia ora, Nigel. Now, I suppose the challenge for me is the 3 minutes. I'm just full of admiration for people who can do what we've just seen our three finalists do and try to encapsulate such complex and important work in such a short period of time. So congratulations to all of you. On behalf of Lukman and Michelle and Madeline, my fellow judges, there are a few reflections that I wanted to share. Let me just start with one personal reflection, if I might. One of the reasons I love my job is because we have so many amazing and diverse research projects going on across our university. Over 1,000 postgraduate research students at AUT and many hundreds of colleagues who are undertaking research in such a diverse range of areas. And in the three finalists, you've seen examples of that. We have marine science work going on, we have clinical health trials going on, and we have work looking at some of the social issues associated with social housing. So that's just a little snapshot of this enormous range of important and valuable research that's undertaken at our university. And it is an exciting thing to be involved with. In terms of feedback from the judges, we were all impressed, and of course a difficult job to choose the one winner. We felt that there were occasionally some pacing issues, as you can imagine, and you can see the presenters kind of watching the clock and speeding up and slowing down to kind of meet the time limit. Completely understandable. But of course all three were very capable and finishing in the time frame, or else they got the disqualification, so they had to be. They were very clear in articulating their research method and design, and that's quite tricky to do because that's usually quite complex. And we found that the use for some of metaphors or analogies was a powerful way to have a lay audience or a non-scientific audience understand what they were trying to get across. There were a few opportunities we felt that were missed, understanding the time restrictions, or perhaps just outlining some of the potential implications of the research or benefits longer term. But overall, we felt that all three finalists were outstanding, and we were delighted to select them as finalists. Their research was robust, valuable, clearly is going to have beneficial impacts, and each of them did an amazing job of communicating in a very challenging circumstance. So on behalf of the judging panel, congratulations. We're very proud of you and what you've accomplished, and we'll look forward to announcing the winner in a few short minutes' time. So there's the feedback from the judges. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mark. Thank you. So we now need to allow the technical team a little bit of time to compile those votes. It shouldn't take too long. And so I'm going to invite you to talk amongst yourselves for a moment. I believe that it's imminent, so I will be right back with you as soon as that award is ready. Stay there. Would you like to know who won? Well, it is a pleasure to invite. Mark's had a busy week, He's had a long week. The Wiki Rangaho, the week of the Research Week, AUT Research Week. And as part of that, I'd love to invite Mark back up to present our winners with their award. I think we're supposed to be over here, Mark. So.
Right. This is the fun part. Not because the Research Week's coming to an end, because we get to hand out some goodies and to recognise our prize winners. But before Nigel announces that, irrespective of who's selected as the prize winners, I again want to congratulate our 3 finalists and their supervisors and those who support them, because this is not an easy challenge to meet, and to even decide to step forward and to have the courage to put something like this together is something that does deserve recognition. Often putting yourself out there, particularly, I know if you're anything like me, there's a bit of cringe factor when you see yourself on a video and you hear your own voice back, right? So even stepping into that space deserves some acknowledgement and congratulations. So congratulations to the 3 of you and to all who've supported you in putting these 3MT videos together. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mark. And so the first award is the audience vote announcement. That's the one, obviously, that you've chosen with your QR code scanning. And just a reminder that your favourite presenter will win a $500 research award from the Graduate Research School. So the results are in, and the winner of the AUT 3-Minute Thesis 2024 Audience Vote Award is Varuna Virasakala. You need to come on up, Varuna.
Come and get your dosh, Varuna, and your certificate. Congratulations, my friend. Very well done. And I also want to just acknowledge, not only is it courageous to do something like this, but when English is not your first language, or you're unfamiliar with sort of the New Zealand accent, the New Zealand way of speaking, again, that takes courage to do that, to step into that space. So well done, my friend. Congratulations.
Okay, time to announce the overall winner of the AUT 3MT competition 2024, and a reminder, they will receive an HP ProBook X360 435 G9 with a pen from ICT and the Apart supplier Cyclone, and a $500 research award from the Graduate Research School, the GRS. And the overall winner of the AUT 3-Minute Thesis Award for 2024 is Ryan Howard.
Well done, Ryan. Congratulations.
Yes,
yes. Wonderful presentation. Great project.
It's an honor, absolutely.
And don't forget the dosh and the special little present there as well.
I do not think I will forget.
Thank you. And just on behalf of the judges, acknowledging Ryan's presentation, his pace, his ability to actually bring to life something that for many of us, in fact for all of us in the room probably, except Ryan and his supervisors, is a completely foreign world. And so for him to be able to bring that sort of to life, just with his description verbally, it made us as judges think about what a shame it is that the rules of the competition don't allow the use of props and visual aids and so on, because we could just see an amazing opportunity to start with a black screen and then have the bioluminescence come out of the darkness, and wearing a squid hat and all of that sort of is off limits and not available, unfortunately, because of the rules of the competition. But despite the constraints of the rules, Ryan did a great job of providing a really compelling image of why this work and research is important, placing it in the context of not only a fascinating and different environment and different creatures, but why it's important from a conservation perspective in the current context of the decade of ocean research as well. So he really put together a really compelling package in such a short period of time. And so we're very proud to award Ryan our AUT award for 2024, and he goes to represent all of us at the Asia Pacific Final. So we wish you well for that, Ryan, and look forward to seeing how you get on there. Kia ora koutou.
And I may have overstepped a little bit. I did bring a prop today, so if
very good. Thanks, Ryan. Can see you're already an absolute squid ambassador, so nicely done. Yeah. Thank you, Nigel.
Don't go too far, Mark. You can have a seat for just a moment. But first of all, a round of thanks. First of all, to our sponsors, Graduate Research School, ICT Services with their Supply Services Cyclone, to our judges, and thank you very much, all four of you, for the work, the mahi that you've put into this and your consideration. It's a tough job, and it takes time and energy, and it's hugely valuable. Thank you for your mahi, your time. And thank you to you here who have come today to celebrate with us, kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face. It's always nice to convene in person and experience the celebration of just being with each other in these moments. So thank you for coming. And also to those of you on our live stream, thank you for joining us today. It's also hugely valuable to have you with us from wherever you are viewing this. Thank you, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. And so with that, as I mentioned, it has been a big week. It's been a big day. It's been a big event for those competitors, but it's been a big week, the AUT Research Week, Wiki Rangahau, and it's most fitting to ask Professor Mark Orams back up, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Research, to conclude not just this moment, but also the Research Week. So, Mark, the final moment for you. Thank you.
Kia ora, Nigel. Appreciate the opportunity to just reflect on this week. We made a decision 2 years ago to bring a week together where, as a community, we could come together to focus exclusively on research. We chose the mid-semester break of the second semester, recognising that there was not going to be a perfect time for everybody, but we wanted to take it outside of the teaching commitments so that staff and students are involved, recognising that many students, postgraduate research students, are also involved in assisting with teaching and marking and lab assistance and other work. So we decided to have it during this particular mid-semester break. We also decided that we would absolutely involve postgraduate research students because you are an integral and important part of our research community. So research at universities doesn't just happen with the academic staff. It doesn't just happen with our postgraduate research students. It also happens with the professional staff who support all of that endeavour, whether they are people who work to help with clinics and labs, whether they are people who are supporting schools and some of the finance work that needs to happen, whether they're people within the graduate research school. So we wanted to also be inclusive and to recognise their contributions as part of our research community. And this year in particular, we wanted to emphasise the importance for us as a university of the partners that we have from outside of our university. These are collaborators who work in government agencies, in hospitals, who work in the not-for-profit sector, in private businesses. So these are people who are important to us as members of our research community who we partner with. And so this year, bringing those outsiders into the university and making sure that they know that they are part of whānau AUT was a major focus for us. So we've had 22 events over the course of this week, and those 22 events have been enormously diverse as the three finalists that we've just celebrated late this afternoon. We've had events on our North Campus in the new building over there in Tukutuku. We've had events throughout this particular campus as well. It's important for me to acknowledge the people who've done an enormous amount of work behind the scenes in Te Wiki Rangahau. So I want to acknowledge our Researcher Education and Development Unit team. It's a small, high-performing team led by Dr. Anais Irvine. So thank you, Anais, for all of your work. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Michelle Ludwig-Williams, who's down the back here in that wonderful dress. Thank you, Michelle, for all of your work. And we're very fortunate to have Katie join us both years we've had AUT Research Week, to help us with all of the logistics and the communication and the scheduling and the run sheets and the bookings, and all of that takes an enormous amount of work. You can think about 22 events. We've got, as you've seen today, live stream. We've got the need for coordinating and putting together run sheets so that people know where they're supposed to be, when and where, and what they're supposed to say. And so Anais and Michelle and Katie have had such an important role with regard to that. So please join me in just acknowledging those three people and the enormous amount of work they've put into this week. Thank you. Now, Anais and her team sit within the wonderful team called the Graduate Research School. And Nigel leads that team, but all of them pitch in. And so I want to acknowledge all of the Graduate Research School team whānau, and in particular to acknowledge that a number of them have been struggling with illness over the last couple of weeks. So there have been others who've had to step in and to cover, and so there's been a lot that's gone on behind the scenes to make this week happen. Also want to acknowledge that across our university there have been people who've stepped up from departments and schools and research centres and institutes and groups who've all decided to pitch in and to make AUT Research Week something very special. We're building some real momentum here at AUT. We're really proud of who we are as a university. We are deliberately and proudly applied and practical in the way that we go about our research, and we look to partner and to share our research with our wider outside AUT community. So it's been my great privilege to be involved in this week. This is the last of the week's activities, and so we'll all go and have a nice rest over the weekend and then back into our normal activities as we commence the last part of semester 2 from Monday next week. So thank you for allowing me to share a few reflections. Thank you to all our ICT, IT services people who've made this seamless, our photographer. We've had a number of other people who've contributed as well. So what I'm going to do now before we say farewell is just to close with a karakia, and then we'll wish you well on your way to wherever you're going this evening. Kia ora tātou. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātia, kia mama, kia nākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te ara tākatā. Koe rā I rongo, whakairia, ake ki runga, ia tinga. Omi e hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora koutou katoa, ka kite. Please, if you're travelling back home, travel back home safely. Have a nice, relaxing and safe weekend. And thank you again for your participation and contributions to this event. Kia ora.